and streaming. Hopefully all is well. We're here with From Right to Rome. I'm Amy Jane Beer, and they've left me in charge for once. It seems like half the team are flung to even more diverse corners of the country than usual. So yeah, my turn in the hot seat, chairing tonight's guests. We are going to be talking about what chapter number is it? Chapter 8, Culture of Wild Service. So hopefully those of you that are reading along will have read the chapter already. And those of you that haven't, it doesn't really matter. You're very, very welcome. And without further ado, before I introduce my guests, or our guests for this evening, I've been asked to read. So are you sitting comfortably? The answer to the question, what is to become of England, will not be found in the plastic soundbites of today's template politicians. It will not emerge from the black and white lines of traditional print journalism, nor the binary coding of discourse on social media. To find a way out of this labyrinth, right or left, to emerge from this underground car park into what remains of our natural world, we must turn instead to a scarecrow with a robin for a heart and a turnip for a head. Wurzel Gummidge. Nick Hayes, would you like to tell us about Wurzel Gummidge?
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and thanks everyone for giving us your time tonight and later on YouTube as well. It's appreciated. Wurzel Gummidge is a Mackenzie Crook BBC production. The first time I saw it, I fell head over heels in love with it. It's this peculiar mix of kind of whimsy, the mythological kind of merged in with your day-to-day parochial, quaint, kind of last of the summer wine Englishness, but has got, just like the Detectorists, just like Jerusalem as well, that Mackenzie Crook was involved with from the early days. For me, it's got this beating heart of what I believe to be folk culture, which is English folk culture, because it's peculiar to this land. It's got an inclusivity in it that is rarely acknowledged by those in the know of folk culture. And I'd quite like to go into that a little bit when we're talking today. But it's, for me, it was just the single most beautiful hour of TV. The one that our guest is in I think it was the 3rd episode. It was about Saucy Nancy, about a ship's figurehead that comes to life. And there's something about this objects coming to life that seems to tie in with not just English folk culture, but the movement that is veering towards a kind of animist philosophy, trying to understand the land and our relationship to it in terms of spirit and sacredness. And that's interesting to me because, for starters, it's highly controversial for English people to be calling on sort of indigenous notions of relationships to land and belonging, especially because the head honchos, those that are driving the ship of England, still haven't, to any adequate degree, acknowledged responsibility, culpability, and certainly haven't or made very little in the way of reparation to those cultures that England itself was responsible for violating. And thank God for everyone involved that we were so deeply unsuccessful in violating those cultures, because they live on and actually are pretty much becoming the core of how England is trying to relate to land in a way that has got a lot more to do with belonging than it does with ownership, which is the current paradigm that kind of dominates. But this Wurzel Gummidge, just like the Saucy Nancy episode, I just can't watch without starting to cry these days. It's got so much heart in it, and there's something about it that is very, very, very English. It's got a cast of some of our most celebrated actors. It's got Michael Palin. Is he the Green Man, or is he a rather confused hedge layer? That sort of sets up the whole vibe of the thing. He believes himself to be invisible, even though everyone can see him wherever he goes. Vanessa Redgrave, Bill Bailey, Toby Jones, Shirley Henderson, Steve Pemberton from Inside Number 9, and all the rest, Rosie Cavaliero. And tonight's guest, very honoured to have you here, Mr. Tim Plester, who I've known probably for over a decade, just in and out, thereabouts kind of thing, doing sort of getting involved in each other's work by accident, really, at first. But yeah, so Tim, thanks very much. You are an actor, you are a documentary maker, you're a writer, you're a screenplay writer. You'll have seen Tim. You might not know that you've seen Tim, because very often you play what they call character roles, I suppose, don't you? Like, but Tim's been starred in Doctor Who, let me see, Bohemian Rhapsody, Game of Thrones, just before that appalling massacre. It's great to see you as the intro to that. And on essentially, as I see it, your acting is the way that you fund the other stuff you do, the documentaries that you make, and they are wholly focused on that kind of intersection between folk culture and pagan. I'm going to let you say something, Tim, because it's quite awkward to be introduced without a word. But thanks very much.
No, you're
Do you want to say a bit about the documentaries?
You're doing a very lovely job of introducing me there. Thank you, Nick. I don't often kind of get introduced with both those hats on, if you like. I'm usually doing something as an actor, or doing something as a documentary filmmaker, I guess, these days. So it's nice to be acknowledged as both. And one of the great things about working on Wurzel for me is it was a kind of opportunity to kind of feel that I was not fulfilling both roles, but kind of I was doing an acting job, but it very firmly had its feet in the world of where I make my documentary work. Yeah, so that was, you know, just perfect for me.
Do you want to tell us a bit about, because the ones that roll off my head, there's The Way of the Morris, The Ballad of Shirley Collins. I know you're making a documentary about Dock Road. Do you want to just give us an insight into not just what they're about, but the kind of prison that you're looking at England through, if that's not too abstract a question?
No, I mean, it's interesting. They're kind of a loose trilogy in that respect, I think. Way of the Morris, Ballad of Shirley Collins, and the as yet unfinished The Island of Dock Row. They are kind of a celebration of, well, they are all celebrations of what you could call kind of English indigenous culture, but also kind of folk customs. In general, these enduring folk customs that have somehow survived to the present day. The first one is about Morris dancing in the village where I grew up in North Oxfordshire. And I grew up around Morris dancing, but never engaged with it. It was always something that I was embarrassed of, because my dad and my uncle did it. And there was something that happened, like a fundamental shift in my understanding of Morris dancing changed when I found out that I'd always known it had been revived in my village, and indeed all around the country, as part of the folk revival in the late 60s, early 70s. I knew there was a revival of interest then because it had died out, but I didn't know that it literally died out because of the First World War, essentially. That, you know, we had a generation of young men who went off to fight in the trenches, and yeah, as we know, many of them didn't come back, and so we lost a lot of songs, dances, you know, in the quagmire of the Somme. And certainly in my village, only one of the Morris team came back, and thus there wasn't any Morris dancing in Atterbury for 50 years. So when I found out about that, that kind of something just fundamentally shifted inside of me, and I kind of realized that this thing that was in my roots, I needed to, you know, finally explore it and acknowledge it. And thus we made the film about Way of the Morris, which then spawned us into, wasn't really the intention to make documentaries about kind of English folk customs, but the success of that one led to making the film about Shirley Collins. Shirley had seen Way of the Morris, its kind of preview screening, and so then we made a film about Shirley. And now, yeah, we're working with Doc Rowe now, and his kind of dedication to these folk customs is absolutely second to none. He's been doing it since 1963, and so there's
he's a folk collector. Is that right? He's someone that records custom.
Yes. He's a folklorist. He's Britain's most important living folklorist. I think the Guardian are on record as having said that at some point. But he's also an accidental archivist. He will also tell you that. That he went down to Padstow in 1963. He doesn't really remember quite how he got there or why he went there, and he saw the May Day Obios celebrations, and he says that he had to go back the next year to prove to himself that it was real, that it wasn't a dream, that he really had witnessed this thing, and that then started him on this pathway to feeling like he wanted to document it, record it. So he started with just drawing originally. He was an artist, so he used to sketch these things, then he would take stills, he would get audio recordings on old reel-to-reel, and then he had a Super 8 camera, and so his archive of material also spans the kind of evolution of consumer technology. So then he's shooting with a big VHS camera, and these days he shoots on he's shooting on these cameras that you can shoot 360 degrees on now, and he's got a little gimbal that he puts it on, and whizzes it all around like this. So he'll have a, what do you call it, a things that go up in the air. He'll have one of those next, I guess, and shoot.
What's one of them?
One of those things.
Yeah. I know those things.
What are they called? Drones. Drones.
What are they called?
Drones.
Oh, drones. Yeah.
He doesn't have a drone, but yeah. So I think, but what connects all of the films in a way is an interest in the folk customs, and the fact that these customs have survived to the present day, and that they're things that are carried out, by the common people, and they're kind of always carried out outside, often in places where traditionally, acts of sedition take place, revolutions are planned. There's something, anarchic about them for me, and some more than others. But there's something, I don't know, kind of heartwarming about the fact that they somehow survived to the present day, and that people still do them with such passion and integrity. And in fact, most of them, to be honest, are kind of better attended now than they were in 1963 when Doc started documenting them.
Well, I mean, we're leaping ahead a bit here, but before I ask that, I should say that there's a blurred line between folk custom and paganism. There's also a blurred line between paganism and what people across the world call indigeneity. And it's a really controversial term. Like even the UN haven't really placed a kind of a line around it, a definition as to what is or what isn't, kind of thing. But I want to say that if we're using indigenous today without unpacking the horrendous context of colonialism, I think for a lot of people in a lot of cultures, it's a bit rich for English people to talk about indigeneity. However, at the very same time, there seems like there's this absolute yearning for people to have a sense of this is the land that they come from. And certain aspects would look at that as a defined by skin color, some by heritage. You know, if my granddad and grandmum lived here, if I've got an old Sussex accent, then in a sense I've got more right to live in Upper Dicker than you do. But there's also another side of that. That seems there's a Dine how would you call a scholar really called Pat McCabe that refers to like what she unpacks and contextualizes as the power over paradigm, that sense that we live in a hierarchy where you know, brought about through capitalism, brought about through imperialism, colonialism, that organizes people's interpersonal relationships in terms of a dominant regime, which is quite analogous to the property regime. I have rights here because I have ownership. You have no rights here. But I'm sure we'll get into that. But I just want to say that that takes a whole load of unpacking. But maybe we should just start first and foremost. How did you get involved with the Wurzel project? I mean, it's been going what for like 5 years now.
I think there were 5 episodes in total. It got truncated by COVID. The one that you were talking about, Saucy Nancy, we filmed that just as we were coming out of one of the lockdowns. Is my memory of it. I have memories of Mackenzie directing with kind of a plastic mask over his already plastic mask of Wurzel, and then there was a guy on set who had to like spray everything down after every take. Everybody has to keep washing their hands. So that's the kind of context of when that was filmed, and indeed the unthanks who appear in the final scene of that episode, that was the first gig they had played in almost a year because of lockdown, and they were kind of just a bit giddy about being allowed out and allowed to you know, do their thing again, just to be able to play live. It was quite a thrill for them to even be able to do that, because we'd all been shuttered up in our homes for so long. So that episode in particular had a kind of, there was a euphoria about it in just the fact that when it was filmed, which I don't know, just kind of maybe embedded in the DNA of the episode itself somewhere. Yeah.
Well, it's definitely.
Go on. I was going to say I've known Mackenzie for a long time, going right back to kind of the start of my acting career when we were both up for a role in a little known TV series called The Office, and we were down to the last 2 for the role of Gareth, and history will tell you who got that part and who didn't. But he's always kind of owed me a little bit. So
you a job, because you appear in episode, or the Saucy Nancy episode, with your face bared to the public. Yes. I guess as an old sort of sea dog, don't you? It's kind of a maritime. You're kind of mates with old Mother Sea, and you're there right at the start and you're there right at the end.
Yes.
But you did remind me, you are also part of the gang of scarecrows who are known as the troublemakers, who ride around on broken bicycles.
Oh, no, not those ones.
Not those guys. Oh,
not the White Gang. The Scarecrows of Albion, we're called.
Oh, you're the ones that unlock the season change.
We do. And look, if you need a reminder, Nick Hayes, I've got something down here for you.
That's terrifying.
That's the mask.
That does not look like a parsnip.
That is a parsnip.
Someone sat on your parsnip.
Sprouts and a parsnip.
Do you want to? Because I actually mentioned that in the chapter that I write, that because the whole sort of conceit of the chapter is that somehow Mackenzie and you guys, the whole production team, have smuggled paganism onto primetime BBC.
Yeah.
And that episode, you know, the world, that's the world tree, isn't it? Yggdrasil is this tree in a supermarket car park that's covered in
plastic
bags. The harvest isn't coming.
No.
Something's clogged. Everything, the environment's fucked. And the premise is that you guys have to unlock the rhythm, you know, the sycamore key, I think it is. Essentially you dance crop circles, you dance the season into changing.
Yes.
Tell us a little more about that, if I haven't.
Well, no, that's you're spot on. That's essentially what happens. There's a nice little bit of detail in there that Mackenzie or Wurzel at one point brings out a map of the shape, the sycamore shape we're meant to be copying, and it's actually on a handkerchief, which for me was always maybe just like a slight Morris dancing nod in there as well. And I'm trying to think if I can even remember the rhyme. I mean, there was a time when it was a complete earworm and I couldn't get it out. Something like, looks like a I can't remember it now. A key from a tree, a sycamore tree. Yeah, and that was there's this rhythm, and then Mackenzie raps over the top of it, and then we start spinning off, into the corn, and create this beautiful pattern, which some guy came and did overnight. And then they shot it with a drone. You remember we mentioned drones earlier? Did a nice drone shot of it at the end to kind of see this ship. But you know, that's Mackenzie also playing into, you know, the mythology of corn circles, you know, and that's something which I can remember being a student when they were kind of all the rage. So he's kind of playing with that for sure.
Well,
can I just butt in and ask if there was a significance in the choice of sycamore, because that's a tree that is derided sometimes as an incomer, and as, you know, is there something there about who belongs and who doesn't?
That's an interesting question, Amy. I couldn't tell you, to be honest. I'm sure it wasn't. It's not. We wouldn't have made that choice kind of just on a whim.
No.
Yeah.
I've always wondered that. Having watched that, I just thought how interesting that it's the incomer, which is a beautiful tree, a magnificent tree, and obviously that was in the days before we lost the sycamore gap tree and before everyone was kind of sobbing about that. But just a tree that has our hearts actually, and that we're sometimes a bit snooty about.
You'd have to ask Mackenzie directly about that, but nothing that's left to chance with these things. He would have thought all that through for sure.
Because ash has keys as well, doesn't it? You know, they call the fruit of ash keys. But one day we'll be able to put all these questions to him. But I guess I was wanting to ask you, Tim, about you know, the basic premise, the reason why it is animism on our screen, and you're allowed to get away with it because it's officially children's make believe. It's, you know, it's set in this world where fantasy is kind of legitimate because it's for children, etc. But the basic premise is that everything you see in the countryside is alive. It has a spirit to it. It has an autonomy to it, and that becomes represented by this kind of this merge of nature and man's creativity, which is basically bunging a Wurzel on some secondhand clothes and calling it a scarecrow. All of a sudden, you know, the Mackenzie or Wurzel Gummidge is not allowed to speak to the humans. That's like breaking the fourth wall kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they catch him at it. And suddenly these children are taken into a world where there's life and spirit and animism to everything that they've previously that they're not able to see as with spirit. And that really strikes me. Maybe that's me projecting a metaphor onto it, but that really strikes me as where England is at the moment. It's really hard to look at a tree and see it how say our Celtic forebears on this land might have seen it,
Sure.
And you were sort of suggesting some other recent films that also kind of take animism as their key. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
It just struck me, if we're talking about, Wurzel is essentially, on one level, you're describing it as, using a kid's TV show as a Trojan horse, to sneak in, this idea of animism and paganism. But it did strike me when we were talking before this that, a few things I've encountered recently have got similar kind of ideas of animism, or kind of green man type figures in them. There's Starvaker, which is just come out as a film. It's originally by Andrew Michael Hurley, and there's a character in that, or a spirit in that, called Dandelion Jack, who manifests in a rabbit. Don't want to be too much of a spoiler alert, but to look out for Dandelion Jack in that one. And then Max Porter, his second novel, Lanny, has got, again, this kind of green man-esque figure around the margins called Dead Papa Toothwort, who I remember when I read Lanny saying to Mackenzie, have you read Lanny? There's some good stuff in there that, I don't know, might be inspirational for future stuff. And then I was watching the new Rings of Power on Amazon the other day for my sins, and the Tolkien figure of Tom Bombadil, who has never appeared in any of the Peter Jackson adaptations. He's appeared in there. So, maybe people are kind of more ready and willing to kind of accept these ideas at the moment. Maybe there is a kind of
There's a great example in Melissa Harrison's novel At Hawthorne Time, just to put in a shout for the female novelist. Very subtly done. There's a character, I think he's called Jack as well, who is who sort of travels in and through and brings with him. This is the idea that I think he's bringing life with him as the hawthorn blossoms. He's sort of, as he he's a wanderer, he's a homeless guy, but he's also got this, there's something about him, he's connected in some way to the change of the seasons. And it's in typical Mel Harrison style, it is very, very kind of subtly done, but lovely.
Well, any Jacks make me think of, and again, this is in our we feature this in our Shirley Collins film, makes me think of the Jack in the Green festivals, of which there were many, and again they all died out, but there's a few now which were again revived in the 60s and 70s. There's one in Hastings, which is probably the most famous one. But I like, what I like about Jack in the Greens is they're kind of the flip side to what when you speak to most people who are not down a rabbit hole of folk customs like me about folk customs, the one that people usually mention above and beyond Morris dancing is the maypole. That's always the one that comes up. And my understanding is, to some degree, the prevalence of the maypole is to do with our old friends, the Victorians, who didn't like any Jack in the Green ideas, because with the Jack in the Green, you've got somebody pretending to be a tree dancing around, kind of a living, what we're talking about, a living tree dancing around, kind of essentially fertilizing the land and the people upon it. Whereas you can see how the Victorians might have seen this and thought, I know what we'll do. How about we kill the tree and we'll have a pole that we dance around. So we're going to have a dead tree that we dance around rather than a live tree that dances around us. So that yeah, I always like to talk about Jack in the Green when maypoles come up, because it kind of it's the flip of it, and it's exactly what we're talking about the idea of animism, I guess.
And in a way, the maypole is a really good example of how the two paradigms, one ownership and one belonging, kind of come together. You know, for the maypole, the kind of tree you were looking for was long and straight. And for the lord that you know, in the 1800s, they had recently enclosed the land. The tree that he was going to make more money out of was the exact same criteria, long and straight, so that you could plank it up. And there are, you know, there's various instances of people being told all of a sudden this common that they once danced the maypole in, or the woods that they went to, sometimes with oxen to get ginormous trees out, is all of a sudden fenced off. And they kind of see the fence, but just because the law has changed, no one really necessarily understands the full ins and outs of it. And, you know, it's only if you're gamekeepered, do you really feel the full force of the law. So people were going in and stealing these trees that were once their sort of common law, their right in both spellings of the word. And the maypole then becomes, but these days the maypole kind of sticks out into modern day culture as something that some villages do. And like you were saying about Morris dancing, it has a quaintness to it that that has almost neutered, like you were saying, the Jack in the Green, the Victorians came along and needed to set this tree back. They needed to strip it of its branches and its roots.
Yeah,
it's quite a good metaphor for. So why do you think folk culture is experiencing a rise at the moment? You know,
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to pin down. I'm not entirely sure why. These things tend to go in waves and cycles. Kind of if it's connected to a folk revival, which it feels like it is to some degree. You know, those things do tend to, you know, go in waves. And I don't know. I don't really have a kind of crystal clear theory on why now, particularly. But there does seem to be something stirring, and I don't know. Maybe, you know, people are feeling more confident to kind of come out with stuff because they see it in the mainstream a bit more, certainly impinging upon the mainstream.
Boss Morris at the Brit Awards, you know, Morris dancing, you know, on stage on prime time kind of thing, to a kind of rock and roll group, really, I suppose. Sounds very granddad, but I don't know what else I'd call.
No, but what is interesting about it, Nick, is I think if you go back, and I looked into this when we were making the Way of the Morris documentaries, that, you know, there was a scene in the late 60s, early 70s with folk music, and it was cool. You know, it was a thing. You had Fairport Convention, you know, making electric folk music, which had never been heard before. And you know, it was a form of rebellion to some people. The guys in my village who revived it in the 70s talk about it in those terms. You know, and part of the problem with Morris dancing is how we associate it now. If we associate it with, you know, middle-aged men with pot bellies, you know, the problem is that it's that generation that revived it in the 60s and the early 70s. You know, that's how old they are now. But if you look, and we were able to use this in Way of the Morris, there's Super 8 footage of them in their prime, they're 20, 21, you know, long hair, big beards. They're kind of, you know, it looks a bit more punk on one level. Yeah, and apparently they tell me that the people in the village were not fans of this thing that we now see as kind of quaint and kind of very countryfile. It was a bit frowned upon by people in the village when they first started doing it. It's like, oh, we're not sure we want these long hairs dancing around the village with their sticks and their bells and their hankies. I'm not sure that's, you know, that's the kind of image we want of our village. So, you know, there's time has kind of worn that down to the degree that, yeah, we need, these things need to be reinvented to some degree, or, you know, a baton needs to be passed on. It feels like that's what's happening. A baton is being passed down to a different generation to kind of, where do you want to take this? Do you want to take this on? Do you want to go somewhere different with it? Do you want to make it a bit more day glow, you know, or whatever it might be?
And that's pretty much a reference to Boss Morris, I'd imagine, who are not just wearing day glow, but shock upon shock of all things, they're female.
Yeah.
You know, there's evidence, as I understand it, from the 1500s of female traditional dancing, female dancing on the commons, whether that was specifically you know, the Morris dance, or which was certainly around in those days, or something else. But the Victorians also had this kind of quite a twisted, quite a sick revival of English indigeneity. You know, at the height of colonialism, you know, sort of that's where, or at the kind of just at the apex when the power was starting to wane, having decimated so many other indigenous cultures. It was all down to Cecil Sharp and you know, people, Kenneth Graham, that wrote Wind in the Willows about 1893-94, wrote the Pagan Papers. There was various pagan societies set up towards the end of the Victorian era. And yet, when they brought up these traditions again, when they kind of breathed new life into them, they did so with the bigotries and the orthodoxies of their age. So Morris became all male. You know, dancing around the maypole became almost a sort of, certainly for Queen Victoria's Jubilee, became a pageantry act. The autonomy of people meeting on a horizontal plane and basically getting pissed or having fun. You know, it's the old word was wake, like Pharrell. You know, you're up all night to get happy. The wakes would happen at the Scouring of the White Horse in Uffington. They'd happen at Jack of Green, and these were autonomous, almost as Burning Man is now. You know, there was no Carling sponsored festival. You brought what you could offer. People gathered in a circle and just made merry. But that became profoundly threatening to you know, a more authoritarian Victorian perspective, and it became swallowed up into this kind of vision of Merry England that was a complete concoction of the authorities of the Victorian era. They were essentially trying to get people to pledge allegiance to a flag that had you know, murdered their ancestors at Peterloo, or, you know, the same. In those early days of the 1900s, the Union Jack people were very, very. What we have now as Commonwealth Day began by Lord Meath as Empire Day, and there's you know, there's record of them saying we're trying to get people to put the flag up, but they don't trust it. They see it as a vision of imperialism. And those are things we've kind of forgotten. You know, it's almost as if our kind of national pride, we're taking the word of the monarchs and the landlords for what national pride is, and that kind of more horizontal commons collective generation of what our culture is has been substituted, you know. But yeah, it seems
it's interesting. Some of the we don't have very many photos of the Adderbury team from my village that went to First World War, but a few of them are from Empire Day.
Yeah. Oh, really?
co-opted to be a part of that in the village. Yeah.
And I'm sure some people loved it because, you know, there's a quite eminent historian on folk custom called Ronald Hutton. He wrote Stations of the Sun and various books about, you know, how little we know about the Celts. But his thesis is, I always found it quite interesting. He's like, we don't know if the maypole was priapic worship or fertility. We don't know if it was Yggdrasil or the worship of the sacred tree or the Axis Mundi. But what we do know is it was an opportunity for local communities to come together, kind of to work together to put up a maypole and, you know, hack a hole big enough in the ground to keep it rooted.
Yeah.
And it's what councils call now community cohesion, which didn't need funding in the old days. It just really needed the rights to be able to gather on land without, you know, the magic golden ticket of ownership.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what you see at a lot of these, you know, folk customs that, you know, Doc Grow has been documenting. You know, they are expressions of community. You know. And Doc will tell you that that's what excites him about them more than anything else. You know, the people who do it and why they do it, and yeah, there's no branding on it. There's no actually. I tell you what's interesting about them as well. They don't, and I've been to quite a few now. Is they don't even see themselves as part of a kind of wider collective of people who do folk customs. They just do the thing that they do in their town or their village one day a year because it's what they do. They wouldn't probably even perceive it as a folk custom. It's just what we do in Padstow or in Abbots Bromley or in Ottery St Mary or, you know, whatever, wherever it is. It's just their thing, and it's their chance. I see it as their chance to one day of the year, you know, reclaim the streets and do their thing. And that to me is where the power in these things lies.
It's interesting. Yeah, I write a bit in my next book about Cooper's Hill, the cheese rolling race.
Yes.
Which is just amazing.
Yeah.
I know, Amy, your kid Lockie was all gunned up and ready to do it, wasn't he?
He was fighting his way through the crowd trying to get there for the kids race, which goes up the hill rather than down.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I was fairly confident that he wouldn't break anything, but yeah, he couldn't get there because it's quite a scrum even just in the spectating area. But yeah, he's very keen to go back next year. So Nick, you've started something.
Your fault.
I mean, I'll take that. I'm very happy. He'll be champion though. He's got, you know, he's got what it takes. Little bit mad. but the point of Cooper's Hill is not just, you know, the express, and the police have tried to ban it.
Yeah.
Now they refuse to attend, except they do attend, and they would, as we were all walking down the hill, they were there with their facial recognition software on their mobile phones, taking pictures of everybody that went to see a load of other people roll down the hill. I don't exactly know what footnote of what we were that doesn't seem controlled, and there were thousands of people there. I think that's accurate to say. We went on the same day, didn't we, Amy? And
yeah, I didn't see you there.
But the group,
there are so many people there. It's completely mad.
Yeah.
But there's something that I wanted to just ask you, Amy, as well, because I guess I was interested with this Wild Service book. We were sort of very deliberately looking at other cultures from across the world to see how they kind of construe belonging, and in a way the kind of LORE, the culture, the custom, the law, the rituals, how in some ways those, in what way they supersede the power of the law, the LAW kind of thing. And I was really interested to see a few people, and actually not liking the way that we were directing the conversation towards land as a place of the numinous or the sacred feelings, and we were, and I got the impression that they were sort of saying, there's no need for that. There's why are we? Maybe they sort of found it a bit hippie, a bit woolly, a bit kind of pod shit spiritual kind of thing. And in a way, you kind of certainly your book, The Flow, it's full of the presence of the numinous, or the presence of a great mystery, a kind of very almost tangible other in there. And yet you're also a scientist. So I just wonder what thoughts came up when if you saw those reviews of the book, or how does that sit with you?
Yeah, I think it's we spend a lot of time. It's, your training as a scientist does put you on a kind of straight and narrow path of what's acceptable and what's not, and what we can know, and how we can kind of test that we know it, how we can test hypotheses. And it does, and scientists are quite uncomfortable, or some of them very uncomfortable, with anything that can't be tested or proven statistically or empirically. And I was probably one of those for quite a while. I went from being a very, very imaginative kid to being a scientist, and kind of becoming quite hostile to the numinous and to any kind of meaning making that seemed, I was brought up in Church of England, but religion was definitely out for a good few years, and it was all part of that. That's what I thought made a good scientist. But something was missing, and I think something was when I went into writing. I was always trying to kind of communicate better, and as a way of kind of, I thought if people understood more, if people could see what was going wrong in the world, and if I could explain it better, if I could make complex ideas more accessible, that would be doing my bit towards turning things around. If people only had more information, then they would start to make better decisions, not just in their personal lives, but about where they cast their votes and where they spent their pounds. But I did that for 20 years, and in those 20 years, we're just losing biodiversity, we're losing habitats. The trajectory wasn't changing. I'm not saying that I could have changed it by myself, but all this effort to communicate and to just feed people information is not enough. The knowledge isn't enough, the understanding isn't enough. And so it was only really when I started relaxing a little bit and being willing to talk about how I felt, as well as what I knew and what I understood, I started to feel like I was communicating a lot better. And there was a moment very much where I kind of properly fell off the rails just in my local woods, which I've told Nick the story. I wrote about it as well. But I was out in the woods. I was looking for an injured red kite, which a friend who was walking her dog had seen this bird on the ground. So I went off with a cardboard box into the woods, and I was kind of combing this bit of woodland looking for this bird. And then just suddenly in front of me, rising up out of the ground, was what anyone with a science brain would just say was a pile of dead logs. But in that moment, to me, it was the massive head of a deer, of a roebuck. It had that proper kind of teddy bear nose that roe deer have, had this huge eye that was kind of twinkling at me. It had the antlers. It was so alive, and it was just, it was the kind of, for me, that was the horned god of the forest that I'd loved as a kid. I had a thing about Herne the Hunter. I know you do as well, Nick, but suddenly there he was. And I literally, I literally just fell on my knees, because there he was. And And so I had a very, very dramatic moment of going, oh, there's a lot about, and a lot of these folk customs, these ideas and these myths were a way of communicating what we knew about and what we understood about the world and about nature. And now they seem to be almost celebrating the opposite. This what we don't know. They sort of the unknown has become almost as appealing as knowing the facts. So for me, as a, you know, I still consider myself a scientist, and I still work part-time, editing scientific manuscripts, that kind of thing, and keeping that bit of my brain kind of trained. But I feel like I communicate a lot better about what we need to do about the knowledge that we have, by bringing in the rest, bringing in the mystery and the numinous and the love and the feeling and the rage. So I think there's absolutely room for both. And I think if you exclude, you know, one or the other, then, you know, that can be equally damaging. So I have sympathy for those scientists that really hate what we're doing in terms of the paganism and everything, because I've kind of been there. But letting it go has been very, very enlightening.
Do you have something on that, Tim, or
not
being a scientist, just being a hippie actor?
I mean, my wife's a massive Robin of Sherwood fan, so she'll really enjoy that story about encountering her and the hunter in the woods, because that's Herne plays a big part in that series. No, I think, you know, I mean, we could almost kind of come slightly full circle with this. You know, is there an element of, you know, is Wurzel some kind of manifestation of Herne, the Green Man? You know, these kind of this kind of, I don't know, there's a kind of need to give face to the land, to feel that it's alive. And I like the fact you talked about the you know, the Great Spirit earlier, or the Great Mystery. I start the way of the Morris starts with a creation myth that I wrote as a way of trying to kind of, you know, root this thing in something that, I don't know, people would see in a kind of less kind of staid kind of English Victorian way. You know, how old is this thing? How can it be you know, lost? Morris Dancing's origins are lost in the mist of time, which is great. I find that particularly attractive, that we don't really know how old it is, where it comes from, why it's done, or we've certainly lost a connection to that. But I find that, you know, as a writer or an artist, I find that to be an advantage in a way, rather than maybe a scientist's head would feel the need to understand it, whereas I kind of like, I've always liked the fact that we don't really know.
Well, it's freeing, isn't it? If we don't know, we're having to kind of think, okay, why might we do this? Why might we keep this tradition going? What reason might we have to sing, to dance, rather than just because it's always been done, which is actually not a very good reason for doing anything. It actually makes us think about what, you know, what we might want to bring to it and what it could mean. It's, you know, in parallel a bit with the rewilding debate. You know, it's not about kind of harking back to some specific point in the past. It's about unleashing potential and thinking about what could be.
Yeah, I mean, the people often, you know, who do these customs, to me anyway, often talk about, you know, they don't want to preserve it in aspect. It's not about doing that. Sure, it shouldn't be about that. You know, it should be about allowing it to evolve where it needs to, you know, and for successive generations to take it on, which, you know, you have to believe, I think you have to believe that's how it survived as long as it has, you know, that it's been allowed to, you know, evolve and change if it needed to.
And there is that massive schism in folk music, isn't there, or folk culture? There's the kind of old guard that want it done exactly as it was yesterday.
Yeah.
They want it done. You know, there's a story I was thinking of. Dave Von Ronk, who's the mayor of McDougall Street, kind of in Greenwich Village around the same time as Bob Dylan, when this sort of 60s folk revival was happening in America and in England. And he sang a load all over the American heritage, which is, you know, from Germany to Scotland to Wales to England, sang all of those songs that kind of influenced roots music, or you know, the kind of and he's there. I think it was Ewan McCall. He's there at a Ewan McCall folk club, and Ewan McCall's banning him from singing anything that you know, doesn't come from Dave Van Ronk's state. And there's this, to me, this really ties into that idea of heritage as well. There's this obsession with primacy, with your origin, with where you came from, in some way giving you this sort of heavily inverted commas perspective, is that folk music, folk custom is
Nick,
about
we're losing you a little bit. Do you want to turn your camera off for a few minutes so we can just get your audio? Because I think you're,
if you're engaged in it, if you're doing it, if you're interested in it, if you're learning about it. Yeah, just saying that there's this obsession with primacy and origin, whether it's to do with folk culture or whether it's to do with sort of English nationalism, that is one way of looking at authenticity. But that there is another way that is to do with process, to do with being engaged, to do with a living tradition. You know, in England, we tend to see our heritage as something behind the red rope of a museum. It's something that must be preserved, and don't you dare touch it because it might fall apart, like Stonehenge. But actually, there's something much more powerful and something that lasts with people for a lot longer, if it's in their hands, if you're able to do with it. You know, it's folk culture is like the Creative Commons. You were kind of born with the right to do what the heck you wanted with it, basically. And there's so many artists at the moment. You know, Angeline Morrison is a good example of people that were. I think she was raised in Cornwall. I think.
Yeah.
But people that don't look the way that your traditional English folk singer is, like, has looked, and for some people is supposed to look, who are doing what they want with the culture because it's spoken to them, and now they're feeding back into that conversation. And that kind of process, for me, is a massively inclusive way of looking at belonging, but it's also much more active and much more vibrant, and it takes it out of the academic and puts it into the experiential, which I think is, you know, one of the aspects that Right to Roam is trying to argue for land. You can really care about it if you're there phenomenologically. You know, you're experiencing it, and what you experienced, Amy, was not technically true, but it put a cold shiver down your spine, that you're still telling that story, and you're still thinking about that notion that these woods are somehow special to you.
They are, and I still go back. You know, he's still there. He looks a little bit less like a god now, and a bit more like a pile of logs. But that doesn't matter. Even when those logs have completely decayed away, he's still there, and he's here now as well, which is, yeah, has been quite transformative. Since you have brought it up, there are, apart from the scientists and the who are anxious or nervous about approach we sometimes take. There are people who have also said that they find the paganism off-putting because of that whiff of nationalism and the far right co-opting a lot of those sort of the imagery and the songs and the heritage aspect of it. So can you think, what can we offer those people as a more sort of natural way in to reconnecting and to finding a kind of a cultural space within nature that maybe doesn't hark back to anything that is new and is for them?
Tim, do you want to go first?
Well, I'd have to think. Yeah, I mean, you know, my kind of experiential history of these folk customs is, I guess, kind of steeped in you know, the tradition of them. You know, so that's an interesting question for me to ponder. I'm not sure I have a good enough answer for you. Have you got a thought, Nick?
Yeah, it's probably not an answer, because I don't think it's definitive. But culture is something that gets generated all the time, and it's impossible for it not to be. You know, it's very much like the wildflowers or weeds of the common. You've really got to glyphosate them. You've got to actively suppress culture for it to not constantly replicate and generate itself and self-seed. And there is a long and ignoble history of far-right nationalism taking hold of traditional folk culture and appropriating it. I mean, Tim, you've just come back from Bavaria, and
yeah,
you were talking about lederhosen and kind of the comparison with Morris dance as an example of that.
Yeah, well, yes, I mean, and my comparison there was that, you know, to most English people, you know, Morris dancing is something to be mocked and laughed at, and I think for most German people, lederhosen holds the same place in German culture. But you know, there is, from what I witnessed in Bavaria this week just gone, you know, there is a move towards trying to kind of take ownership of those things again, and kind of move them away from, you know, what Hitler and the Nazis did with those that imagery and those objects, you know, and people. But do you know what? As I say, the other great thing about Bavaria is that landscape is so powerful. Those mountains, and the houses. You really feel like there's a symbiosis between what the humans have put there and what nature has created. It really felt like the two things just go together perfectly, and has over time and over history. You can't. That landscape was breathtaking for me. It was. I've been before, but the weather was perfect. It was blue skies. It was big skies. They just had a storm the week before, so all the mountains had this, you know, dusted with snow. It's just, I don't know. I'm not a religious person, but there's something you could, you know, I can look at a landscape like that and believe in, you know, a higher power.
There's another example is Wayland's Smithy. I don't know if you've Radiohead filmed one of their earliest videos at Wayland's Smithy, and it's just behind the Vale of White Horse in Uffington. It's on the Ridgeway.
Yeah.
And you know, there's neo-Nazi groups that go there that believe, you know, I think they're called Woden's folk, and they believe that Hitler was the reincarnation of Woden. Which physically is a bit of a stretch, I feel, but like based, you know, a lot of their kind of just made it up basically, and as a result, Wayland's Smithy is, you know, the beech trees have swastikas carved into them, or have had swastikas carved into them. And Wayland Smithy itself is, you know, the story that's attached to it about Wayland has actually got nothing to do with the cultures that that actually built this kind of burial mound. That was a projection put on by the Saxons and Anglo-Saxons that came, you know, 4,000 years later, kind of thing. So just like the Vale of White Horse, or the White Horse at Uffington, it's essentially a symbol of how little England is connected to that kind of Neolithic hunter-gatherer, that real origin. We know next to nothing about the beliefs, and most of the beliefs that that we sort of ascribe to Celtic or you know, cultures actually come from our colonizers, you know, from the Romans. I say ours just because we're all three of us on this land, England, at the moment. And so it's almost a very sad story of English indigeneity, that we have very, very little record of anything in terms of culture, which almost turns the table on, you know, England considers itself, and say by Americans is considered to be a place of esteemed ancient cultural heritage, whereas obviously in North America, the Native American religions and cultures and cultural practices, dances, stories, origin myths went back 12,000 years, and we don't have even a fraction of that in England. So in a sense, all we're really left with is the now and what we do. But maybe to tie it back to a bit of Right to Roam kind of stuff, without that connection to land, without seeing those kind of breathtaking vistas that England also has to offer, then how can those stories of experience and kind of how to act, you know, certainly for Blind Boy, I don't know if you guys listen to Blind Boy's podcast, but those old myths.
I love Blind. I only discovered him this year. It's been a revelation. Yeah,
he's brilliant. But for him, a lot of those myths were creating a sort of ecological code of conduct by making this lake sacred. You're not going to abstract from it because it contains the soul of a goddess. You're going to treat it with the reverence that these life-giving sources of nature really deserve, kind of thing. And so whether they're scientifically accurate sort of pales in comparison to the kind of ecological protection order that by telling the stories that is passed down through generations. And so the community remains reverent of the environment. So without that connection, those stories die, and then without those stories, the connection becomes, just almost twee, or a bit like Morris dancing, a bit kind of lampoonable. Basically, it's but I think they really held something for the people that were connected to a lineage. You know, I see you looking maybe at the clock, Amy. Am I just being? Are we good for time? Or
we're good for time. We can go on a little bit more if you wish, but no pressure. But as you were speaking, what I was thinking of is these waves of replacement that our islands have had of their human population. A few weeks ago, I was in North Wales, and I went to a cave called Bont Newydd in North Wales, which has the oldest human remains found in this island. So these are Neanderthal remains, and it's the most fantastic cave. It's been closed up. It was used as a munitions store in the war, so it had this very kind of brutal wall and these massive doors fitted, and it's supposed to be locked, but but it's not. I think the locals have other ideas about whether or not they should be allowed access to this place. So the locks are broken off, and you can go in. And so the walls there, which detracts a little bit from the kind of grandeur of this cave entrance, but it is an absolutely spectacular cave. If you can you can stand there and try and unsee the wall and the door, and you get a huge sense of what it would have been like. So a very livable kind of cave. And a sense of connection, because it faces the direction it faces, like you'd have seen the sun kind of traveling around. It would have been warm, and this is pre-ice age, so this is a different species of human that lived there, and yet you still get that sense that the land must have spoken to them in some way, and they were obviously replaced by modern humans, and humans of our species. The kind of transitions from the great kind of eras of the past, from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic and the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, they're all to do with replacement of people. Those are new people coming in, and we don't know whether that was an invasion or a conquest of some sort, or whether they just sort of brought diseases that the local populations couldn't cope with, or we don't really know how that happened, but it has happened multiple times. So the Romans definitely did it by conquest, but prior to that, there have been waves and waves and waves, and so we're left with just the land to speak to us and to make us kind of feel a sense of connection, and to make our own stories, and maybe these few kind of enticing clues that those people have left behind, like things like Wayland Smithy or Stonehenge or other monuments and mysteries. And I love the mystery of it, because it does make us it does make us use our imaginations and just and try and just tune into what the land might have to teach us, rather than what a history book or a carving or something that we've been told might tell us. Just to use our senses and use our imagination.
And it seems to me that without that sort of ongoing and kind of long heritage of unbroken connection with the land, that those stories of primacy and skin color and bone density and DNA, all these kind of pseudoscience at best, are all that people of these islands really have as a way of expressing their belonging. It's something. Wasn't the Duke of Wellington in the papers today? Some old boy peer was saying how important it is to have aristocrats in charge of political decision making.
It wasn't him, but it was another hereditary lord.
It wasn't the Duke of Wellington, but he referenced the Duke of Wellington, and William Cobbett was writing at the time, and certainly the battle that gave the Duke of Wellington his title, but also his the enormous amount of lands that was sort of given to him as a reward. It was I think it was the 67th Regiment or whatever. Basically, the people that fought in those battles had their land that they used to self-subsist and to be autonomous. They had them taken away, enclosed and privatized for the Duke of Wellington. So Cobbett was writing, and he was going, and Cobbett, it has to be said, had some pretty anti-Semitic and at times anti-African views, but his purpose was to sort of write in defense of the working class, and he was saying, why are these men expected to fight for their land when they themselves have no legal connection to the land anymore? In fact, through fighting for the Duke, they had, certainly for the people in Hampshire, they had their lands taken away as a reward for the guy that sat on the horse and told them all to go into battle. And there's a kind of hypocrisy there that it's almost as if the landowning class seem to claim that all of rural culture that exists is kind of comprised of fox hunting. They say, don't attack our culture. This is an English culture. And the diversity and the abundance, the richness of English rural folk culture was directly attacked by, fox hunting and by the laws of property that kind of fox hunting fetishizes, to the point that, in a way, the shooting lobby, the hunting lobby are in a way correct. Like this relatively recent culture is very dominant as a culture in the English countryside, whereas the kind of the maypole, the Morris dancing and stuff, it's experiencing a resurgence now, but not in the way that it was, because there's so little land for us to be able to express that autonomy on. And we're trying to fix that.
We're trying to fix that, yes. Nick, would you like to close with a reading? Thought you had something.
Oh yeah, there's a bit from the chapter enclosure. Sorry, Amy.
Yes, but before I get you to do that, Tim, thank you so much for joining us on this
having me. Yeah.
Episode of
Thank
the
you,
escapade that is Wild Service, and I hope we'll see you at some more Right to Roam events before long.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
So Nick, I'll let you read, and then I will stop the stream when you're finished. So yeah, I'll let you just carry on, and but if we say goodbye now, and then we can just finish with your reading.
Cool, and thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate you giving us your time tonight. That's really cool. Nice to see you as well.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Right to Roam.
Oh, Nick, do you want to turn your camera on for this bit?
Let's see if it works. I'm probably in the dark now. Too much anyway. It's refusing to work. Enclosure is often described in terms of economics, but rarely are its impacts on culture considered. The crime of enclosure was not only our exclusion from the countryside, nor was it just the accumulation of private capital via dispossession of public wealth, but it was also the dissolution of our cultural relationship with the land. When the use of land is directed not by the community that lives on it, but by one individual owner, a monoculture of ideology holds total dominion. As the forests are cleared by the plough, so too are the stories that tell of our relationships with the forest. Ecocide begets mythocide. Seasonal festivities are banned, heritage crafts die out. It becomes pointless or twee to tell the stories of the land that we have no contact with. Instead of the rich diversity of expression that came with an autonomous experience of nature, our interaction with the outside world is filtered through the banal corporate construction of the leisure industry. The Temple of Pan has become an Airbnb listing. But just as weeds creep through the concrete, so Lupton, that's Hugh Lupton, a phenomenal storyteller of the oral tradition. So Hugh Lupton is positive about our cultural tradition with the land. It is still there, waiting to be reassembled and retold, to be transformed from the secret depths of silence into articulate speech and song. And it's ours. It is the dreaming of these particular landscapes.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nick. And for those of you watching, thank you for joining us. We will be back next week with episode or chapter 9, I believe, with the amazing and beautiful Dal Kular, who's written the chapter on healing. So we'll see you then. Bye for now.